A poor mechanic fixed her bike. She left without paying, then a helicopter landed outside his house. Have you ever met someone who walked into your life without warning, left no name, no promise, and yet somehow changed everything? He was a quiet mechanic, living in a forgotten town, still grieving the love he'd lost. She was a stranger on a broken motorcycle, carrying secrets she hadn't said aloud in years. When their paths crossed on a foggy morning, neither of them knew. It would become the beginning of something neither one believed in anymore. This is not just a story about motorcycles or rose gardens or second chances. It's a story about how kindness, offered without expectation, can plant the seeds for something extraordinary. Rust and Roses is a journey of healing, love, and the quiet magic that happens when you dare to open your heart again. Even after it's been broken, you might want to stay until the very last word. If you enjoy heartfelt stories about redemption, real love, and the beauty of small, meaningful moments, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you won't miss the next story that might just stay with you long after it ends. Now settle in. Take a breath. Let's begin. Rust and Roses. The fog rolled in thick that morning, like a curtain pulled gently across the mountains, muffling the world. Elliot Hayes stood outside his weather-worn garage, mug of black coffee steaming in his calloused hands. The taste was bitter but familiar. Everything in Elliot's life was familiar these days. Predictable, quiet, a little too quiet, if he were honest. The garage stood on the edge of town, backed against a pine-covered ridge where birds rarely sang and time seemed to move a little slower. Elliot liked it that way. It was the kind of place you ended up when you'd had enough of noise, enough of cities, enough of people asking how you were when they didn't really want to know the answer. He set his mug down on the wooden workbench, just inside the open bay, and reached for his socket wrench. The old Triumph Bonneville on the lift still wasn't right. There was a click in the timing chain that felt wrong in his gut. Elliot believed machines talked if you listened close. Enough. Most people didn't listen anymore. That's when he heard it, a soft rumble out in the fog, low and uneven, like a motorcycle gasping its last breath. He turned toward the road, squinting. A silhouette emerged, blurred at first, but becoming clearer as it drew closer. The bike, an older Honda Shadow, maybe early 2000s, wobbled to a stop just outside the garage. The rider cut the engine with a sputtering cough, then pulled off a matte black helmet. She was younger than he expected. Early 30s maybe, with long brown hair tucked messily into a faded army green jacket. Her eyes were sharp, assessing, like someone who'd learned not to trust too easily. Dirt streaked her jeans and her boots had seen better years. "Morning," she said, voice low and hoarse, like she hadn't used it much lately. "I think something's wrong with the carb. Or maybe it's the spark. I'm not sure. It died on me 3 times before I found this place." Elliot nodded once. "Let me take a look." She didn't offer her name. He didn't ask. That was how it went out here. As he worked, crouched beside the bike, he could feel her eyes on him. Watching. Not impatient, not nervous, just present. Like she was waiting for something more than just a fix. He glanced up. "Where you headed?" She hesitated. "Not sure yet." He raised an eyebrow but didn't press. The engine was flooded, the spark plug barely hanging on. He replaced it, checked the fuel lines, tightened a few things that had no business being loose. His hands moved automatically, but his mind wandered. There was something about her, an energy that didn't match the weariness on her face. "You're good at this," she said after a while, her voice softer now. "I've had practice," he replied. "Too much of it, maybe." She smiled faintly, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. When the bike roared back to life, her face lit up just a fraction, like a flicker of warmth behind frosted glass. She swung her leg over the seat, pausing before sliding on her helmet. "How much do I owe you?" she asked. Elliot shook his head. Nothing, her brows furrowed. You sure? Yeah, he said simply. Some things don't need a price tag. She studied him, really studied him this time, as if trying to figure out what angle he was working, what game he was playing. But there was none, just a man and his garage and a broken machine that needed fixing. She fastened the strap under her chin and kicked up the stand. Before the engine started again, she said almost too quietly, "Thank you for not asking any questions." And just like that, she was gone. The fog swallowed the bike and her along with it, leaving only the lingering echo of exhaust and something else. Something Elliot couldn't name but felt in his chest like a knock he wasn't sure he should answer. He stood there a long while after, staring at the empty road. The garage felt different now, like it had taken a deep breath after holding it for years. He didn't know her name, didn't know where she came from or where she was headed, but she had eyes like someone who used to believe in something and maybe still wanted to. Later that evening, he found himself back at the workbench, cleaning a wrench that didn't need cleaning. The garage radio played a soft blues track, something mellow and aching. His dog, Charlie, curled at his feet, snoring in old man rhythm. Elliot looked out through the open door into the dimming light, and for the first time in a long time, he wondered if maybe the past didn't have to be the only thing keeping him company. He didn't believe in omens or fate, but something had changed. He could feel it, like a bolt loosened in just the right way, freeing a part of the machine he hadn't realized was stuck, and in the distance, the mountains stood silent and tall, waiting. The fog lifted by mid-morning, but a strange stillness lingered, like the air hadn't quite decided whether to move forward or stay suspended in yesterday. Elliot stood at the edge of the gravel drive, wiping his hands with an oil-stained rag, eyes fixed on the horizon, as if expecting the woman on the motorcycle to come back the same way she left. But she didn't. She hadn't said her name, and oddly enough, that felt deliberate. He ran a hand through his greying hair and turned back toward the garage, Charlie trotting faithfully behind him. The dog had started limping again. Arthritis, most likely, but still followed Elliot everywhere, like he was afraid something would change if he didn't. Inside the garage, the world smelled of old rubber, engine oil, pine from the hills, and the faintest trace of her perfume. He didn't notice it at first, but now it seemed to linger in, the air like a question. Clean, subtle, and oddly nostalgic, like something from a life he no longer lived. He sat down at the bench, staring absently at the socket set. A half-assembled carburetor lay in front of him, the project he'd abandoned when she arrived. But now his thoughts were somewhere else entirely. He wasn't the kind of man to dwell on strangers, especially not ones who came and went with no more than a broken engine and a thank you. But this woman, there was something in her silence that haunted him. Not the silence of someone hiding, but of someone holding too much. He sipped lukewarm coffee, let the radio hum low in the background. The static between songs filled the space where his thoughts couldn't settle. It had been 5 years since Ruth passed. 5 years of living on autopilot, fixing engines, planting roses he never watered, pretending the world didn't matter outside the lines of his fence. But that woman, whoever she was, had knocked something loose. "Don't get any ideas," he muttered to himself. Charlie raised his head, ears flicking as if to say, "Too late for that, buddy." Later that afternoon, Elliot visited Joe, his oldest friend and fellow veteran. Joe ran the town's only bait shop, more as an excuse to talk to people than to make money. Elliot found him on the porch, rocking gently in a sun-bleached chair, a mason jar of iced tea sweating beside him. "You look like a man with a ghost on his tail," Joe said before Elliot even sat down. Elliot chuckled. "A ghost on a motorcycle? Maybe." Joe raised an eyebrow. "Now that sounds like a story." Elliot told him everything, well, everything that had happened. A woman, a busted bike, a few words, and an even heavier silence. Joe listened without interrupting, which was rare. When Elliot finished, Joe leaned back, whistling low. You think she was running from something? Maybe. Or toward something. Joe nodded, thoughtful. Either way, she found you. Elliot frowned. I didn't do anything. That's just it, Joe said. Sometimes the best thing you can do is be the person who doesn't ask questions. Let people breathe around you. That's rarer than you think. Elliot didn't respond. He just stared out at the hills, at the long road cutting through the pines. Something about the way she left bothered him. Not the suddenness, but the restraint. She'd been careful, composed, almost rehearsed. She was someone used to disappearing. That night after dinner, Elliot sat in the garage again. This time, he wasn't working. He just sat, hands idle, eyes drifting over old Polaroids pinned above the workbench. Him and Ruth, him and Joe, him alone in uniform, standing beside the same Triumph he still kept on the lift. The past had a way of staying loud in quiet places. He reached for the small paper tag he'd slipped into the woman's saddlebag earlier. That morning, an old habit from his military days, when parts needed labels. He'd written down the model of the plug he'd replaced, the torque settings, and, at the bottom, one simple line. If she gives you trouble again, come back. No name, no phone, just the message. He had no idea if she'd even see it, but something told him she would. As he turned off the lights and closed the garage for the night, the moon cast silver shadows across the gravel. Charlie trailed behind him, yawning audibly. And Elliot, for the first time in months, left the door to the garden open, just a crack, enough for the wind to wander in. It was the sound that got him first. Not loud exactly, but heavy, a low-frequency thrum that made the garage windows rattle in their frames. Elliot looked up from his workbench, where he'd been halfway through rebuilding a carburetor, on an old Indian Scout. Charlie, curled in the corner, gave a sharp bark and stood. Then it came. The blades of a private helicopter cut through the morning silence, scattering pine needles as it descended toward the clearing behind Elliot's garage. A wide patch of gravel he hadn't used for anything but firewood delivery since Ruth passed. What in the... Elliot muttered, wiping grease from his hands and stepping outside. The chopper's landing gear touched down with a gentle bounce. The engine idled with a throaty purr, and Elliot instinctively took a step back, shielding his eyes from the swirling dust. The side door opened. She stepped out, leather boots hitting gravel, dark jeans pressed, a tan wool coat cinched tightly around her waist. Her hair was down now, falling in soft waves, and her eyes were hidden behind oversized sunglasses, but he knew it was her, the woman from the Honda shadow. Elliot crossed his arms as she approached, slowly, deliberately, as if every movement had been considered in advance. Well, he said, voice low and level, you came back. Most people just send a thank you card. She removed her sunglasses. The eyes were the same, sharp, tired, but somehow softer than before. I owed you more than that, she said. Elliot gave a slight nod. You found the note, she smiled faintly, tucked it into the lining of my saddlebag. Clever. They stood there for a moment, neither speaking. The blades of the helicopter slowed behind her, whining into stillness. Finally, Elliot gestured toward the garage. You want to come inside? He asked. She hesitated. I'd like that. Inside, the air was warm, tinged with motor oil and coffee. Elise took a seat on a stool near the workbench while Elliot poured 2 cups from the half-full pot, sliding one toward her without a word. I didn't expect the grand entrance, he said after a beat, glancing toward the still-visible helicopter through the open door. She took a sip of coffee, then met his gaze. I didn't plan on it either, but things changed. Elliot raised an eyebrow. What kind of things? She set the mug down, fingers lightly resting on the ceramic. I wasn't honest with you about who I am. I figured, he said evenly. She blinked. You did? He gave a half smile. Most people who don't know where they're going don't fly private, Elise laughed, a genuine startled laugh. The sound warmed the space in a way the heater never quite managed. "I'm Elise Monroe," she said finally, "creative director at Argent Motors. Or at least, I was." Elliot frowned. Argent was a name he hadn't heard in years. They were once one of the top innovators in American motorcycles. Sleek designs, powerful builds, veteran initiatives. He remembered reading about their rise and their fall. "I thought Argent shut down." "They almost did," she replied. "Then they sold out, moved overseas, downsized everything that made the company meaningful." "And you?" "I walked away," she said quietly, "after they greenlit a project that used stolen work." Elliot felt something twist in his chest. "Stolen work?" She nodded. "Designs, concepts, from a private submission made years earlier. I found the file last week. Your name was in the metadata." Elliot stared at her, his fingers curling slowly into fists. "I didn't know when I met you," she said quickly, "but after the bike was fixed, I kept thinking about this place. About you. When I got back to the city, I dug into the archives. Your designs were there, modified, repackaged, but yours." Elliot's throat felt dry. He hadn't thought about those designs in years. After Ruth died, he'd packed up that part of himself and buried it. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked. "Because I want to make it right," she said, "and because I have a proposition." Elliot's eyes narrowed. "Go on." "I've started something new," she said. "Small, just an idea right now, but it's real. A non-profit, focused on building affordable bikes for disabled vets, mechanics, and rural communities. Lightweight, adaptive, durable. I want you to help lead it, as co-designer. Maybe more." He blinked. "You want me to design motorcycles again?" She nodded. "You have something they forgot: craftsmanship, soul. I can handle the money, the marketing, the boardrooms, but I can't build what you build." Elliot looked down at his hands, worn, scarred, grease-stained, hands that hadn't held a drafting pencil in nearly a decade. "I'm not the guy you think I am, Elise." She leaned forward. "You're exactly the guy I think you are, and I didn't fly here to ask you to save the world, just to help change a few lives." A long silence followed. Outside, the wind rustled through the pines. Charlie padded over, leaning against Elliot's leg, with the kind of quiet loyalty only dogs and a few rare people possess. Elliot looked up. Her eyes were steady, not hopeful, not pleading, just honest. And for the first time in years, he felt something stir. Not excitement, not fear, just possibility. "I'll think about it," he said finally. She smiled. "That's all I'm asking." As she rose to leave, he walked her to the helicopter, the gravel crunching beneath their boots. Before boarding, she turned. "By the way," she said, a hint of playfulness in her voice, "you never told me your name." Elliot smiled just a little. Elliot Hayes." She nodded. "See you soon, Elliot Hayes." And then she was gone, lifted back into the sky with a roar of blades and a gust of cold air. But this time, Elliot didn't feel like she was disappearing. He felt like something had just arrived. It started with a knock, not on the door, but on the garage wall. 3 short raps, not loud, just enough to make Elliot look up from beneath the Ford he'd been working on all morning. The weather had turned warmer, unusually mild for early spring, and he'd left the garage doors open wide, letting in birdsong and the scent of thawing pine. She stood just outside the threshold, hands in her coat pockets, smile hesitant. "Hope I'm not interrupting," Elise said. Elliot slid out from under the truck and squinted into the sun. "You didn't bring a helicopter this time?" She chuckled. "Thought I'd try the old-fashioned way, rented a Jeep in town." He dusted his hands on a rag, nodding toward the workbench. "Coffee's hot, if you're brave." She stepped inside without hesitation. The garage, as usual, smelled like oil, cedar, and something faintly metallic. But now, with her in it, there was something warmer threading through it all. "Do you ever close this place?" she asked, looking around. "Only when it storms hard enough to rattle the windows?" She glanced at the wall, lined with tools arranged with military precision, and smiled. "Still looks like a soldier's garage." Elliot poured 2 mugs of coffee, sliding one across to her. "Habit's hard to kill." They sat in comfortable quiet for a while, sipping, letting the sounds of wind and wrenching fade into the background. Then Elise asked gently, "Do you mind if I ask what made you stop designing?" Elliot didn't answer right away. He stared into the dark surface of his coffee like it might hold the right words. "My wife," he said finally. Elise looked up, attentive but not intrusive. "She passed away 5 years ago," he continued. "Car accident. She was coming home from town, hit by a kid who'd been drinking, barely 20. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. Elliot nodded. "We'd just bought the land behind the garage. She wanted a rose garden, said garages shouldn't smell like metal alone. I was still working for a firm in Colorado, consulting for small motorcycle startups, sending in designs, revisions, new frames. But after she died, none of it mattered." Elise didn't speak. She let the weight of his words settle, undisturbed. "I packed it all away," he said. "The plans, the tools, the drafts. Told myself fixing what was already broken made more sense than designing something new, at least with engines. There's a manual." He set the mug down, fingers resting against the rim. "But grief doesn't care about torque specs." "No," Elise said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It doesn't." Elliot looked over. At her, really looked, at the crease in her brow, the way her shoulders curled forward just slightly, like she was carrying something invisible. "What about you?" he asked. "What are you running from?" She didn't flinch, but he saw the truth in her eyes before she spoke. "My fiancé," she said. "Well, ex-fiancé now." Elliot raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. "He was the CFO at Argent," she continued. "Smart, charismatic, charming in that calculated way. He convinced me we could rebuild the company, turn it into something meaningful. I believed him. Then one night I walked into a meeting and found out he'd sold my entire design portfolio to an offshore investor without telling me. Used my work as leverage for a buyout." Elliot's jaw tightened. "That's low." She nodded. "I left the next day, got on the road, rode for hours, days, until my bike broke down outside your garage." "Life has a way of putting broken things where they're needed," Elliot said. They both fell silent again. This time it was heavier, but not uncomfortable. Shared hurt often made the best kind of quiet. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering the first few petals from the cherry tree beside the garage. Spring was coming, slowly, reluctantly. But it was coming. Elise set her cup down. "I came back because of what you said. About things not needing a price tag, about just helping because you can. It stuck with me." Elliot shifted in his seat, unsure what to say. Compliments always made him a little uneasy. She continued, "I don't want to run anymore. I want to build again, but not just machines. I want to build something that matters, that lasts, with people who care more about what works than what shines." Elliot nodded slowly. "You're talking about more than bikes," she smiled. "Maybe." He looked at her, really looked, not as a client, not even as a woman, but as someone who, like him, had been broken, but not beyond repair. "I have a frame I never finished," he said. "Lightweight, durable, meant for all terrain. Started it 10 years ago. Ruth used to say it looked like a stallion frozen in mid-run." "Can I see it?" Elise asked. Elliot hesitated, then stood. "Come on." He led her into the back of the garage to a room he rarely opened. Dust clung to every surface, and the air smelled like aged metal and forgotten dreams. There, on a stand, covered with a faded drop cloth, sat the frame. Unpainted, unlabeled, but elegant in its rawness. Elise approached it like it was art. She ran a hand along the curve of the frame, her fingers gentle but sure. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "No," Elliot said quietly. "It was potential. Now it's purpose." She turned to him. "Then let's finish it together." For a moment, the silence stretched too long. Then Elliot gave the smallest of nods. "All right," he said. As they stood there side by side, the late afternoon light filtered through the dusty window, illuminating the frame in gold, and though neither of them said it, they both felt it. Something had shifted, not fixed, but definitely beginning. Elliot hadn't touched the rose garden in nearly 5 years. It sat behind the garage, tucked between the gravel drive and the sloping edge of the pine ridge, overgrown, tangled and tired. The old lattice fence leaned like a drunk against the weight of wild briars, and the once proud arbor at the entrance had collapsed under a blanket of ivy. But Ruth's garden was still there. Underneath the weeds and rot and time, it waited. On Saturday morning, Elise arrived with 2 things, a flat of young rose bushes and a thermos of real coffee that didn't taste like burnt regret. "I figured we could use a fresh start," she said, stepping out of the Jeep with gardening gloves tucked into her belt. Elliot raised an eyebrow, glancing at the plants. "You came prepared." "I Googled what grows best in Vermont," she grinned. "Also, I have a stubborn streak." "I already noticed." They stood at the edge of the ruined garden, surveying the chaos. Elise stepped through the gap in the fence, boots crunching on old stone paths, swallowed by moss. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Elliot almost laughed. "It's a mess." "It's both," she replied, "like most things worth saving." They worked side by side all morning. He brought out shovels, a wheelbarrow, shears dulled by time. Elise tore into the weeds with determination, hair pulled back, hands covered in dirt by noon. Elliot, watching her from the corner of his eye, felt something warm settle in his chest. Not attraction exactly, not yet, but recognition, a knowing. At one point, she knelt beside a half-buried trellis and uncovered a small iron plaque, worn but still legible. It read, "For Ruth May, what we plant outlast what we fear." Elise brushed the dirt off the letters and looked up. "She sounds like she was amazing." Elliot swallowed. She was. She believed in small things, that they meant more than we gave them credit for. Elise nodded, then without speaking, dug a new hole beside the plaque and gently placed one of the new rose bushes there. They didn't need to say what it meant. By late afternoon, the garden began to take shape again, uneven and imperfect, but alive. The kind of beauty that only comes from things once lost and then found again. They sat on the stone bench at the far end, backs aching, hands scratched, dirt under every fingernail. "You know," Elise said, pulling off her gloves, "I used to hate the quiet." Elliot glanced at her. "After I left the company, I stayed in hotels just for the background noise," she admitted. "TV's on all night, traffic outside the window. I thought it helped." "And now?" She smiled. "Now the quiet feels earned." The breeze stirred through the trees, carrying the scent of soil and something sweeter. New life, maybe. Or the memory of it. Elliot leaned back, his eyes closed. "I used to sit out here with Ruth and drink coffee every Saturday, even in the snow. She'd wear this ridiculous pink parka with fur around the hood and pretend it was spring." Elise laughed. "I like her already." "She had this rule," Elliot said. "Every time we planted something new, we had to give it a name. Said it helped it grow." Elise tilted her head. "And what did you name them?" He opened one eye. "I didn't. I thought it was silly." "And now?" He looked over at the young rosebush nearest the bench, its leaves trembling slightly. "In the breeze. Now I think it's the kind of silly that sticks with you." She smiled and stood, brushing off her jeans. "Then we'd better name the new ones." They spent the next hour naming each rose bush, laughing at some, thoughtful. With others, there was Stella for the brightest bloom, August planted where the sun hit hardest, and Mercy for the one that looked half dead but wasn't. Elise named one June Ruth, planting it near the arbor's remains. She deserves a second bloom, she said. Elliot didn't respond, but his throat tightened. As dusk fell, Elise hesitated before heading back to her jeep. I was going to leave tomorrow, she said. Go back to Boston, start making calls, pulling the non-profit together. But maybe I can stick around a little longer. Elliot leaned against the fence, arms folded. Plenty of weeds left, she smiled. That's not why. He didn't ask for the real reason, and she didn't offer it. But it hovered between them, undeniable, gentle, real. When a jeep pulled away down the gravel road, Elliot stayed in the garden long after the sun had dipped behind the ridge. Charlie sat at his side, head resting on his paw, tail thumping lazily. The roses wouldn't bloom for months. But tonight, under the first stars of spring, something far more delicate had taken root, and this time, Elliot wasn't afraid of it. The mornings were quieter now, not because the world had changed, but because Elliot was starting to notice the silence. He found himself waking earlier, long before sunrise, just to walk the rows of barely budding rose bushes and check on the trellis they'd reassembled from salvaged wood. Sometimes he talked to the plants, half mocking himself for it. Other times he just listened to the earth, the wind, the hush of things coming alive again. But that morning, something cut through. The calm, a padded envelope. No return address. Just his name, scribbled in a careful hand, left at the base of his garage door. He turned it over a few times before opening it, almost certain it was a catalogue or misplaced invoice. Inside were two things, a flash drive and a single sheet of paper. You should know the truth before it becomes someone else's lie. No signature. Elliot stared at the note, a chill crawling up his spine. He hadn't touched a computer in years, but the old laptop in the office still worked, mostly. He plugged in the drive and waited. The folder loaded quickly. Its title read, Prototype C-Series, Internal Memos and Designs. At first glance, the documents were a mess of CAD renderings, engine layouts, and technical spec sheets. But as he opened each file, his hands began to tremble. He knew those designs, knew them like fingerprints, the frame curvature, the dual balance suspension system, the modified clutch lever with adaptive pressure sensitivity for injured riders. They were his. Every line, every note, every configuration came from the sketches he'd drawn years ago at Ruth's bedside while she slept, sick but still smiling. He clicked on an email chain, internal company correspondence. We can repackage this under Elise's direction. He's a ghost. No one will trace it. The date was nearly 2 years old, before Argent collapsed, before Elise's departure. Elliot sat frozen, the air in the room thick and unmoving. Elise hadn't written the emails, but her name was all over them, as the director, as the lead on the project, as the person who, at least on paper, had claimed what wasn't hers. Charlie barked once from outside, breaking the trance. Elliot closed the laptop slowly, his face unreadable. He needed air. Out in the garden, the sky had turned overcast, casting a grey hush over the roses. The ground still held warmth from yesterday, but Elliot felt cold, disconnected. He barely registered. The sound of tires on gravel until her voice called out, "El, you here?" Elise stood at the garden's edge, arms wrapped around herself, eyes bright despite the dim day. She was holding a folder, the same kind she'd brought before, filled with business plans and mock-ups. "I brought the draft for the new model," she said, waving the folder. "I thought we could go over it this morning if you're free." Elliot didn't answer, just looked at her for a long moment. She tilted her head. "What? Did you ever see the design files from the old Argent archives?" he asked, voice even but sharp enough to slice. She blinked, caught off guard. Yes, I told you. I found your name in the metadata. That's how I realized. No, he interrupted. I mean before that. 2 years ago, when you were still with them. Her smile faded. No. Why? Elliot reached into his back pocket and handed her the folded sheet, the note from the envelope. She read it, brow furrowing. Where did this come from? I don't know. But the flash drive that came with it has the full project specs. My specs, used under your name. Her eyes widened. Elliot, I swear, he held up a hand. You said you didn't know. I want to believe you, but your name is all over it. Your approvals, your edits, your initials in the sidebars. I didn't see any of that, she said. Not then. I was managing a dozen campaigns. PR, branding, outreach. I wasn't hands-on with the R&D side. But your fiancé was, Elliot said quietly. Her lips parted slightly. Shock, then shame, washed over her face. He had access to my credentials, she whispered. I used to let him sign off on drafts. He said it saved time. You trusted him. I was in love, she said, voice breaking. The silence that followed was deep, not angry, not cold, just heavy. I walked away the minute I found out, she added. I never meant to take credit for something that wasn't mine. Elliot stared past her, into the rows of rose bushes, green but not yet blooming. Doesn't change what happened, he said. No, she said, but it changes what I do next. She stepped forward, placing the folder gently on the garden bench between them. I'll withdraw, she said, from the non-profit, from the designs, from you, if that's what you need. But I didn't come back here to steal anything, Elliot. I came because I wanted something real again, something honest. Elliot didn't move, not for a long time. Then quietly he said, You stayed to help rebuild a garden you didn't destroy. She looked at him, eyes full of both hope and hurt. I'm still here, she said. I know, he replied, but right now I need space, not forever. Just enough to breathe through this. She nodded. I understand. She turned and walked back to her jeep, shoulders square but trembling. She didn't cry. Not until the engine started and the tires began to crunch their way down the gravel road. Back in the garden, Elliot sat on the stone bench, folder beside him, fingers tracing the edge of the paper Elise had brought. The wind picked up, scattering. A few loose petals from June Ruth, now fully leafed. Something beautiful had begun to grow, but even roses needed pruning to thrive. The next few days unfolded in silence, not the kind that screamed, not the kind that punished, just a stillness between two people walking separate circles in the same orbit. Elise didn't come by. She didn't call. Elliot didn't reach out. And yet her presence lingered like a phantom among the rows of budding roses and half-finished blueprints in the garage. Elliot kept busy, filling his hours with noise. He repainted the garden fence, sorted bolts by size, even scrubbed the garage floor clean, as if removing the last traces of their collaboration would somehow help clear his mind. But it didn't. Each act of routine only sharpened the ache beneath. The ache of almost trusting again, of nearly believing someone could enter his world without undoing it. On the third morning, a truck pulled into the driveway. Not Elise. A man in his 60s climbed out, tall and lean with sun-beaten skin and uncalloused hands. He wore a Veterans Affairs windbreaker and carried a clipboard. You Elliot Hayes? He asked. Yeah? I'm Carl, the man said, offering a firm shake. Director at the Franklin County Vets Center. Got a call from a woman named Elise Monroe. Said she wanted to cover a year's worth of maintenance for every bike registered by our disabled vets. Parts, labor, even fuel assistance. Elliot stared at him. She said that? She wired the money yesterday. No press, no paperwork, just a note. Tell Elliot this is for the ones who served and the ones still struggling. Carl glanced at the garage. She said you might not want the attention, but she thought you'd know what to do with it. He handed Elliot a folder with the donation details, nodded once, and left. Elliot stood still for a long time, the folder heavy in his hands. No spotlight, no apology speech, just kindness. Quiet and complete. He walked slowly into the garage, set the folder down, and stared at the prototype frame sitting under the soft lamp above the workbench. Her note echoed in his mind, not the words but the meaning behind them. She hadn't run. She hadn't tried to fix the past with excuses or ego. She'd done something better. That evening, Elliot took a ride. The sky was soft with the colors of early dusk, rose gold and pale blue blending like brushstrokes across the ridgeline. He rode the Triumph slowly, as if savoring every bend in the road, past the bakery, the general store, the church with the chipped bell tower, past the little post office where Ruth used to send Christmas cards in July, and then up the winding hill that led to Ridgeview, the overlook above the valley where he hadn't been in years. He parked the bike and sat on a flat rock that faced the west, letting the breeze pass over him. In the far distance, headlights flickered on the highway like fireflies caught in glass. His thoughts drifted to Elise, to her laugh when she named the rose bushes, to the way her eyes softened when he spoke about Ruth, to the tension in her voice, when she said, "I wanted something real again." That night, Elliot couldn't sleep, so he wrote. He hadn't written anything in years, no letters, no journal entries, not even lists. But something in him cracked open, and the words flowed like oil from a long-stalled engine. He wrote about the day Ruth planted the first rose, about the morning Elise walked out of the fog, about the pain of betrayal that still sat heavy, but no longer felt like the end of the story. He folded the note, placed it in a small envelope, and sealed it with a piece of electrical tape from his toolbox. Then he waited. The next day, he drove into town. The sun was high, and the air held the warm edge of early summer. He stopped by the coffee shop where Elise had said she sometimes worked from when passing through. The barista recognized her name, nodded toward the corner where she often sat. Elliot left the envelope on the table. No name on the front, just a rose doodled in black pen, a habit Ruth had taught him. He walked out without looking back. That evening, Elise found it. She'd returned to town to pick up supplies, not expecting anything. Certain Elliot had made his choice. When she saw the envelope, her breath caught. She opened it carefully, unfolded the note. "I was angry because I believed again, and when you believe again, you have something to lose. But then you reminded me, trust isn't given in grand gestures. It's built in quiet acts. I'm still here too." She read the note twice, then pressed it to her chest. She didn't cry, but she smiled for the first time in days, not because she hoped, but because she knew. That night the wind shifted. It carried the scent of fresh soil and blooming things, and in the distance, two roses, June, Ruth, and Mercy, opened their first petals beneath the stars. The morning they began building the prototype, the sky was the color of brushed steel, cool and soft, with streaks of gold slipping through like light trying to remember how to be bold again. Elliot was already in the garage when Elise arrived, her arms full of parts, cables, and a small paper bag that smelled suspiciously like fresh cinnamon rolls. "You came armed," he said, nodding toward the bag. She grinned. "You don't build a revolution on an empty stomach," Charlie barked once in approval, and took his post near the heater, tail thumping like a metronome set to hope. Elliot gestured toward the center of the shop, where the stallion-shaped frame, sleek, matte, and waiting, rested on its stand like a promise. "You sure about this?" he asked. She set the rolls down, pulled back her sleeves, and said, "Nope, but I'm here." And that, somehow, was more than enough. They worked in a rhythm that felt strangely natural, like two musicians who hadn't rehearsed but somehow found the same song. Elliot laid out the wiring harness and handed her the schematic. Elise, cross-legged on the garage floor, traced every connection with the tip of her pen before reaching for the tools. The sun inched across the concrete, casting shadows that shifted, from sharp to soft as the hours passed. They didn't talk much, didn't need to. The conversation was in the clicks of sockets, the careful torque of bolts, the shared glances when something fit just right. Around noon, Elise paused and reached into her jacket pocket. "I have something," she said, pulling out a small metal emblem. It was circular, about the size of a silver dollar, engraved with the Argent logo, but someone had etched a second layer over it. A simple rose, blooming through the center. Elliot looked at it, surprised. "Where did you get that?" "I made it after the garden." She ran her thumb over the edge. "I thought maybe we could add it to the tank, not as a brand, just a mark. For us." Elliot nodded slowly. "Rust and roses," she smiled. "Exactly." He took the emblem and held it up to the light. "You know, Ruth once said machines are just souls in disguise." Elise tilted her head. "What do you think she meant?" "That we build with our hands what we can't fix in our hearts." They installed the emblem just above the ignition mount, discreet, but impossible to miss once you looked. It caught the light differently than the rest of the frame. Warmer, that. Evening, as the last bolt slid into place, Elliot leaned back on his heels and stared at the finished prototype. It was unlike anything he'd ever built. Lightweight, but grounded. Sharp, but soulful. The handlebars were slightly wider than standard, better for those with limited range of motion. The clutch was redesigned for low-pressure engagement. The seat, firm, minimalist, and perfectly balanced. It was more than a motorcycle, it was a declaration. Elise stood beside him, arms crossed, dirt smudged across her cheek, sweat lining her brow. "We should test it," she said. "It's getting dark." "Even better." They rolled it out of the garage into the open yard where the gravel met the edge of the garden. The roses, young, green, reaching, rustled as the wind picked up. Elise swung a leg over, adjusted the throttle and took a breath. Elliot raised an eyebrow. "Want me to ride first?" "I'm not breaking it," she smirked. "I'm proving it." She turned the key, and for a moment there was only the whisper of wind. Then the engine rumbled to life, not loud, not boastful, but confident. It purred like it belonged in the world. Elise eased forward, then circled the clearing, slow at first, then faster. Her hair streamed behind her, and her laughter cut through the dusk like music. Elliot watched, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth, hands on his hips, heart ticking faster than it had in years. When she stopped in front of him, engine idling, she said, "That felt like flying." "You looked like it." She swung off the bike and handed him the helmet. "Your turn." Elliot hesitated, then took the helmet, slid it on and mounted the bike. As his fingers curled around the throttle, a strange calm settled over him. He remembered the last time he'd ridden for no reason. It had been with Ruth, years ago, on a back road in late summer, with no destination except away. They'd stopped under a sycamore tree, eaten sandwiches off the tank, and talked about all the things they'd never build. Tonight, he was building again. He took the bike around. The garden, the engine humming beneath him like a second heartbeat. It moved clean and sure, the balance perfect, the weight just enough to remind him it was real. When he stopped beside her, he pulled off the helmet and said only, "It works." She looked at him for a long time, then asked softly, "So do we?" The question hung between them. Not a plea, not even a question, really. Just an offering. Elliot stepped closer, not touching her yet, but closing the space that had long been too wide. "We're getting there," he said. And then he reached out, not to take, but to offer. His hand brushed her cheek, and when she leaned in, he met her halfway. The kiss was soft, slow and sure, not the start of something wild, but the continuation of something honest. When they pulled back, the roses behind them rustled again, and the engine ticked as it cooled, the air around it still warm. That night, they didn't speak much. They sat on the bench, shoulders touching, watching the sky slip into indigo, and though nothing was promised, not yet, everything felt possible. The headlines hit like a hammer. Ex-Sergeant Exec returns with controversial veteran project. Is this a PR redemption story or a cover-up? Elise Monroe re-emerges, but can she be trusted? Elliot stared at the screen in Joe's bait. Shop, the words blaring beneath a photo of Elise, poised, beautiful, unknowingly captured beside the motorcycle they just finished. His stomach twisted. He hadn't seen her all day. Damn media buzzards, Joe muttered, flipping off the volume. They smell blood in a clean story like this. Elliot didn't answer. The photo was grainy, but it was unmistakably their bike, his garage in the background. Someone had leaked the prototype. Someone had known where to find her. "Do you think she planned this?" Elliot asked quietly. Joe shot him a look. "You really believe that?" "I don't know what to believe." Joe crossed his arms. "You do. You just don't like the answer." Elliot left the shop without another word, the bell over the door jangling behind him like an accusation. He found Elise at the garden. She stood beside June Ruth, pruning shears in hand, frozen mid-motion, as if the rosebush had said something. She wasn't ready to hear. When she turned and saw him, something in her face fell, like she already knew what he was about to say. "You saw it," she said. "I did." She nodded. "They've been sniffing around for weeks. I guess someone finally leaked the design." "Who?" "I don't know. Maybe someone from the old board. Maybe my ex trying to reclaim the narrative. It doesn't matter now." "It matters to me," Elliot said, voice steady but tight, "because now people are looking. At you, at this garage, at us." She took a breath. "Then let them look. We have nothing to hide." "But I do," he said, sharper than he intended. She flinched. "I've spent years building a life in the quiet," he continued, "out of sight, no headlines, no noise. I came here to disappear, and now, because of you, we're exposed. I didn't ask for this either, Elliot. No, but you bring it, all of it. The attention, the past, the chaos. And what, you'd rather go back to fixing brakes and pretending Ruth's garden was enough?" Her words landed like a slap, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. He turned away, jaw clenched, heart pounding with a conflict he couldn't name. "I don't know how to live in your world," he said quietly. "You don't have to," she replied, stepping closer. "That's the point. I left that world. I chose this. I chose you. But if you're too scared to let yourself be chosen—" "I'm not scared," he snapped. "Yes," she said, soft but firm. "You are. And that's okay. But don't pretend it's about me." The silence that followed was thick, raw. Then she said, "I've been offered a slot on a national board, veteran outreach and tech innovation. They want me in DC next month." Elliot nodded, not looking at her. "I haven't said yes." He finally turned, eyes unreadable. "Why not?" "Because I thought maybe we were building something here, not just a bike, not just a garden." His voice dropped. "Maybe we were." She waited, but no words followed, so she gave him one last look, steady, loving, but no longer pleading. "I'm not asking you to follow me, Elliot. I'm asking if you're willing to walk beside me, even if the road is louder than you'd like." And with that, she walked to her Jeep, engine purring, like the prototype had days before. But this time, the sound faded not with hope, but with distance. Elliot sat on the bench near the garden for a long time after she left. He watched the wind sway the roses, watched Charlie rest his chin on the cool stone path. He listened to the nothingness that had once comforted him, now echoing with everything unspoken. When night fell, he opened the garage. The prototype sat under a canvas tarp, waiting, but tonight he didn't touch it. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, and whispered into the dark, "I don't know how to do this." But the garage, of course, offered no reply, only the scent of oil, earth, and roses through the cracked open window. The days that followed were unusually bright for late spring, as if the sun had grown impatient and pushed its way through the season ahead of schedule. But Elliot didn't notice the light. Not really. He went through the motions. Oil changes, spark plug replacements, customer drop-ins, but everything felt slightly off-kilter, like a tool you'd swear was calibrated until it failed you mid-job. The garden grew, as if unaware of the weight pressing down on its caretaker. Roses unfurled, in slow, elegant defiance. June Ruth had bloomed early, her petals soft pink and proud. Elise hadn't come by since the conversation at the fence. No messages, no envelope this time. Just quiet. Elliot wasn't sure what he was waiting for. Her return. Another choice to be made for him. He hated indecision more than he hated pain, and yet here he was, stuck in the middle of both. It was Joe who finally broke the pattern. The old man showed up at the garage with 2 fishing poles and a 6-pack of root beer. "We're going for a ride," he said. Elliot wiped his hands on a rag. "You hate fishing," Joe shrugged. "I hate watching you mope more." They drove north to the lake Ruth had loved. Quiet, reflective water, circled by red maples and memories. They didn't fish. They just sat. After a long silence, Joe cracked open a bottle and said, "She's not Ruth, you know." Elliot didn't respond. "But she's not Ruth either," Joe added. "What I mean is, Ruth challenged you, called you out, made you better. Sound familiar?" "She also didn't drag a media circus into my life," Elliot muttered. "No," Joe agreed. "She just dragged you to dance halls and made you wear bow ties, and you went, because you loved her." Elliot looked at the water, the bottle cool in his hands. "You're scared this won't last," Joe continued, "so you'd rather walk away before it hurts." "That obvious, huh?" Joe chuckled. "Only to people who know you, and dogs." Elliot smiled despite himself. "Charlie's been judging me all week." They fell quiet again. Then Elliot said, "She got offered a national post, Elise, in D.C. Joe nodded slowly. "And what did you say?" "Nothing. I just froze." Joe took a slow sip. "Son, life doesn't hand you a woman like that twice. If she wants to lead and you want to build, well, that's not opposite directions. That's 2 lanes on the same damn road." Elliot stared at the trees across the lake. The breeze moved. Through them gently, like a mother brushing hair from a child's forehead. That night, Elliot returned to the garage and opened the tarp covering the prototype. He ran a hand over the polished tank, fingertips lingering on the rose emblem Elise had engraved. It gleamed under the overhead light, stubborn and beautiful. He pulled the blueprint off the wall, cleared the workbench, and began making notes. Reinforce the rear suspension, widen the footrests for better balance, add a detachable sidecar option for mobility assistance. He worked past midnight, not just adjusting the bike, but building something with purpose again, with belief. The next morning, he called the vet center and confirmed delivery of 3 bikes within the next 2 months. Then he packed a small duffel. He didn't leave a note, didn't tell Joe. He just locked the garage, left food for Charlie with the neighbor, and took the Triumph onto the open road. It was nearly dusk when he arrived at the Brickfront Community Center in Boston, where the National Veteran Outreach Conference was being held. He didn't have a badge, didn't need one. He stood at the back of the crowd in the main hall, flannel shirt tucked in, boots still dusty from the road. The speaker was finishing her introduction. And now to speak about adaptive design and the future of community-based tech initiatives. Elise Monroe. She walked onto the stage with quiet authority, confident, composed, the version of her the world had known. But Elliot saw something different now. He saw the woman who knelt in the dirt to plant June Ruth, who took his silence not as rejection, but as a wound to wait on, who didn't beg but offered. She began her talk, voice calm, steady. "I've worked in corporate design. I've been on teams that won awards, but none of that taught me what one old mechanic in Vermont did. He reminded me that innovation doesn't begin in labs. It begins in loss, and if we're lucky, in love. Elliot felt something shift in his chest. Not broken, just realigned. After the talk, he waited by the side exit. When she stepped through, her eyes scanned the crowd, and then stopped. "Hell," she breathed. He took a step forward, smiled faintly. "You looked good up there." "You came. I got tired of not showing up." She stepped closer, searching his face. He said, "I can't promise I'll like the spotlight, or the city, or the pace. I don't need promises," she said. "Just presence." He reached for her hand. "Then let's figure out the road together. No map, just trust." She nodded once, eyes glistening. "And maybe a rose or two." They stood there for a moment in the hum of the crowd, the lights, the new chapter unfolding quietly between them, and just like that, Elliot Hayes, man of tools, grief and slow hands, chose motion over memory. The morning of the first community ride broke with a sky painted in watercolor hues, rose golds, dusty blues, a soft blush at the horizon that looked almost shy. The kind of sky that didn't announce a beginning, but blessed it. Elliot stood. Beside the garage, sleeves rolled, adjusting the final bolt on the sidecar of a newly finished bike. It was the third one completed for the Veterans Ride program. The other two were already parked in the gravel lot, engines humming low and eager like horses at the gate. The sound of laughter drifted in from the garden. Elise was helping one of the younger volunteers plant a new climbing rose vine near the rebuilt arbor. She was in jeans and a worn denim jacket, hair tied up with a red bandana, every inch the woman who'd once knelt in this same soil, only now more rooted. The transformation of the garage was subtle but undeniable. The workbench now held shared blueprints. The radio played softer tunes. The photos on the wall included new ones, a group of veterans standing beside their custom bikes, Elise and Elliot smiling beside the very first prototype, a candid shot of Charlie napping in a helmet, and the garden. The garden was no longer just Ruth's, it was everyone's. June Ruth bloomed tall and fragrant, her petals blushing deeper now, almost red. Mercy, once struggling, had doubled in size, and Stella practically glowed in the morning light. Small, wooden signs marked each name, handwritten by the kids who helped water them every weekend. Elliot walked to Elise, handed her a cup of coffee. She took it with a quiet smile. "You ready?" he asked. She nodded. "You?" He thought about it. About the fear, the grief, the years lost to silence, the blueprints left to gather dust, the woman who arrived on a broken bike with no name and left something priceless in her wake. Then he looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "I'm ready." They joined the others near the start of the gravel trail that wound behind the garage and into the rolling hills of Vermont. A modest turnout, maybe a dozen riders, a few vets with adaptive sidecars, some townfolks on old cruisers. No press, no banners, no big sponsors. Just people, wheels, and purpose. Elliot gave a nod to Carl, who was climbing into his own modified ride, then swung a leg over the prototype. Elise joined him on her bike, the rose emblem catching the light like a secret. "Let's ride," she said, and they did. The convoy moved like a slow river, gentle, proud. Past the pine ridge, down into the hollows, where the streams whispered. Under the bridges, birdsong overhead, the hum of engines blending into something almost orchestral. Elliot let the wind carry him, let the road unwind beneath him like ribbon. Beside him, Elise laughed into the breeze, hair slipping loose from her bandana, eyes alive in a way no photograph could ever capture. At a clearing near the ridge, the group paused for water and breath. The veterans stretched, Some hugged. A few cried without saying why. No one needed to. Carl clapped Elliot on the shoulder. You built more than bikes, my friend. Elliot shook his head. We did. Elise walked over and took his hand, not performatively, not as a gesture for others to see, but because that's where it belonged. They sat on a log near the edge of the overlook, watching the last of the riders disappear into the tree line. Below, I used to think, Elise said, that fixing something meant bringing it back to how it was before. Elliot glanced sideways. And now? She smiled. Now I think it means building something better from what remains. He nodded. Rust and roses. She rested her head on his shoulder. Exactly. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows and golden light, they walked back toward the garage. Charlie met them halfway, tail wagging in wide, happy arcs. Behind them, laughter echoed, soft and unforced. In the doorway of the garage, Elliot paused. On the wall beside the workbench, he'd added one final photo that morning. Just a printout, nothing fancy. A grainy still from a security camera. The moment Elise first arrived, helmet in hand, standing in the fog. He looked at it, then at her. Funny how that day started, he said. She smirked. Funny how you didn't charge me. I was going. Two, he said, deadpan. But you left before I could. They both laughed. Inside, the lights flickered on, casting a soft amber glow on the garage floor. The prototype gleamed beside a half-built new frame. The coffee pot gurgled full again. The roses rustled in the garden. And Elliot, who once believed that healing was something private and slow, now understood this. Healing, like love, doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it arrives in a broken engine, in quiet hands, in the way someone stays. And sometimes it blooms. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you for staying with me. Now I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? What part of the world or what kind of life experience brought you here today? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories mean more than you know. If this story touched your heart, and you'd like more content like this, stories of kindness, healing, and love that quietly changes everything, feel free to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you'll never miss the next journey we take together. Thank you truly for being here. Whether you're watching alone with a warm cup of tea or listening while driving down a quiet road, I'm honored to share these moments with you. Until next time, take care of yourself. And don't forget, even the rusted parts of your life can bloom again.